So I looked into this story about Elon Musk, and the reason why I started looking into it is because, well, I saw some people on Facebook saying something like, "Oh, Elon Musk, he has stood up to the Zionist." And when I hear rhetoric like, stick it to the Zionist, stand up to the Zionist, or something like that, I will usually look into specifically what is being referred to, because one thing that I have noticed is that really since the last decade, hatred towards Jews, being antagonistic towards the Jews, has become something of a trend, and it's pretty scary given the history of what happened 80 plus years ago. We all know what I'm talking about. And so I looked into this story and I found out basically that there was some guy on Twitter who said something to the likes of Jewish communities foment hatred against whites. And I have no sympathy towards Jews who are scared of Muslim immigrants who hate Jews, because the Jews are the ones behind bringing in Muslim immigrants and refugees, essentially blaming the Jews on the Islamic refugee crisis. And Elon Musk replied to this person's tweet saying, "You have the actual truth," basically saying, "I agree with you." And this is what has caused all the controversy. The way I look at it is this is just another indication that hatred towards Jews has become trendy, and it has become commonplace, to the point where you have one of the most wealthiest, one of the most influential people in the world actually agreeing with far right rhetoric. When someone says something like, Jews foment hatred against whites, this is pretty common far right neo Nazi dog whistling. Call me a cuck, call me some sort of whatever, bootlicker, whatever you want to call me. I don't really care. This is the reality. I've been reading about this stuff since 2016, and this is what I have noticed over the years, that when people say things like the Jews foment hatred against whites, this is like when you have black Afrocentric nationalists here in the United States say things like, Jews hate blacks or something like that, or they'll say, the system is fomenting hatred against blacks, or they hate us black folk and stuff like that. It's basically the same mentality, but it's being expressed by white nationalists, or white ethnocentric nationalist, far rightist, or European new rightist. So the fact that you have someone who is as wealthy as Elon Musk and who is as influential as Elon Musk saying things like this, or agreeing with this type of rhetoric, I should say, it is just another indication that this trend is becoming more and more common, and it is creeping up into the mainstream. Now, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and before that, for someone to say something like this would have been considered far right, fringe, something that was just completely crazy. And if someone were to say something like that, there would have been an outcry, and that person would have been deemed anti-Semitic or a neo-Nazi, to the point where that person would not have popular favor. The difference between now and then is that now you have someone who is very powerful, wealthy, and influential agreeing with this sort of rhetoric, and the masses on the internet agree with him. You do have people who disagree with him. You do have people who say this is just anti-Semitism, or this is just a foreshadowing to Nazism and things like that. But one thing that I have noticed is that the masses that are against the Jews are growing tremendously. And Twitter has changed since Elon Musk took over it. One thing that I have noticed, and I did some exploring into Twitter a couple of days ago, is that you will have anti-Jewish memes on Twitter. Like, I saw this one where it has a white woman with a black eye, and she has a black eye. So it's a white woman with a black eye, and she has a black eye, and then there's like a Jew hovering over them, and he has this sadistic smile, and he has the big nose. I mean, when I see this sort of thing, this is like Third Reich level propaganda. And for people to be posting stuff like this, a lot of people to be posting stuff like this, and for a lot of people to agree with this sort of thing, it's pretty disturbing, to say the least. To say the least, it is pretty concerning. But it really just goes to show that antagonism towards the Jews is increasing, and it is becoming very, very common. And what does this mean? And what have I been warning people for years? I have been warning people about a future Holocaust. I have been warning people about a future Holocaust, and that it is not just the Islamic world that hates the Jews. Hatred towards the Jews is growing amongst Westerners, and you are seeing it. You're seeing it happen in real time. And I started noticing a lot of this stuff during the refugee crisis, because there was a lot of talk during the refugee crisis in Europe about how Jews were behind the refugee crisis because the pro-refugee organizations, and this is what they were saying, the pro-refugee organizations are ran by Jews, so therefore Jews are behind the curtain. They are the villain behind the curtain. So therefore we have to go after the Jews. So to all of the right-wing Jews who think that they can be allies with Western far-rightists, the hatred is not just towards the refugees. The hatred, because you have these Jewish people, these right-wing Jews who are racist themselves, who are like, oh, we can make an alliance with the Western far right, and we can go against the Islamization of the West, and blah, blah, blah. You do realize that they will also hate you. You do realize that a lot of these people also hate you. I have been spending a lot of time reading through European New Right literature, for example, and the New Right, it's just remarketed Nazism. That's all it is. I know I sound like one of these neoliberal types, or I sound like one of these typical liberal progressives or something like that when I say like this is a Nazi and that's a Nazi. One thing that I have noticed is that you can't really just call out Nazism or say like this is Nazism or this is a precursor to Nazism without appearing to sound cringe, right? Because the word Nazi and anti-Semitism has been thrown around a lot, and so people have made a meme out of this, and they'll say, oh, he's just another person crying wolf, or he's just another person screaming anti-Semitism, blah, blah, blah. Because, over the years, for many years, people have been speaking out against anti-Semitism. So it's been talked about so much that you have these right-wing people who will take it and say, oh, look, they never stop talking about this, ha, 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 and they have made a meme out of it. It's kind of like the Holocaust. The Holocaust was talked about so much in the 1990s, I remember, with films like Schindler's List and with other films like The Pianist, which I'm not sure if The Pianist came out I think The Pianist came out in the early 2000s, but it was around that same time. But there was a lot of talk about the Holocaust in that time period, and the Holocaust was talked about so much that people who hate Jews have used this as a meme, like, oh, they never stop talking about the Holocaust. When are they going to shut up about it already? To the point where when somebody does bring up the Holocaust, or when they warn about the possibility of a future Holocaust, they get laughed at. Oh, they're just like a broken record. They never stop talking about it. When something is talked about a lot, when something is warned about a lot, people who are against you speaking about it make a meme out of it, and then they say that you're a broken record to try to ridicule you and humiliate you and make fun of you so that they can get people to not take you seriously. This is the whole strategy that's being utilized here. It's the same strategy of comedy. Make a joke out of something and it no longer becomes serious. Make a joke out of something that is serious and it no longer becomes serious, and people no longer take it seriously, and therefore you can take that which must be taken seriously and you can promote it and make it powerful again. And when people warn against it, they'll say, oh, he's just one of those idiots. And this is the whole strategy that they utilize. And I remember during the refugee crisis, there was a lot of talk about how the Jewish operatives are behind it and blah, blah, blah. And then when people said, hey, this is anti-Semitic, they'll say, oh, they're screaming anti-Semitism again. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I've spent a lot of time reading European New Right literature, which, like I said, European New Rightism is just Nazism repackaged. And there is a very... there's a magazine that's very known in European New Right circles. It's called Secession, and it is headquartered in Germany. That's where it's published, and it's ran by a guy named Götz Kubitschek. Götz Kubitschek is one of the probably the most prestigious New Right philosopher, if not in Europe, then at least in Germany and Austria. Definitely very well known in New Right circles in Germany and Austria. He runs the Secession magazine. And I was looking at the articles on the Jews, and there's a lot of articles in Secession that talk about the Jews. And these articles say things like, well, we don't like the refugees, but Jews are also a problem because their loyalty is not fully to Germany or not fully to Austria. Their loyalty is more so towards Israel. So they too cannot be trusted. And there was an article that I read. It was written by a guy, I think his name is something like Martin Leichmetz. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he says something to the likes of, we really can't make an alliance with right-wing Jews because no matter how right-wing a Jewish person may be, that person is still loyal to Israel, and therefore their loyalty cannot be fully trusted. So they don't like the refugee, but they also despise the Jew. So the hatred is not just towards the refugees, it's also towards the Jews. And this reminds me of an interview that I saw on the Gad Saad show back in, well, the video was recorded in 2016. I watched it in 2017. Gad Saad is a Lebanese Jew, and Gad Saad has interviewed people on the far right. One of these people was Ingrid Carlqvist. Ingrid Carlqvist is a Swedish far right activist. And in this interview, Ingrid Carlqvist made a prophecy. She made a type of prediction. And she said that when the Vikings wake up, and this is the type of language that she uses, when the Vikings wake up, they will say that the people responsible for bringing in all these refugees were journalists, politicians, and the Jews. And she says, and they will go after the journalists, the politicians, and the Jews. And this is what she said.
And I'm really, really worried that when the Vikings wake up, and if they see, okay, our country has been destroyed with Muslim mass immigration by these politicians, these journalists, and the Jews.
Right.
They will say, who must we get rid of? The politicians, the journalists, and the Jews.
Right. And the Jews won't put up as dangerous a fight as some of the other folks, so then we could kick them around, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that this is the future. I think that this is the future. And I know there's not a lot of people making these sorts of predictions. I'm the only person I know that has made these sorts of predictions. People don't want to make these kind of predictions because they don't want to sound cringe, and they don't want to sound alarmist, and they don't want to sound dramatic or melodramatic. They don't want to sound as if they are overreacting. And this is a big fear that a lot of people have, not just in the media, but just in regular social circles in general. Nobody wants to be seen as the guy who overreacts, or who is a drama queen or king, or someone who's melodramatic. Nobody wants to appear as that person. So everybody wants to appear as a moderate. Everybody wants to say, well, things are still great and everything is fine. Well, right now things are great, relatively speaking, right? But we can't just focus on we can't just focus on things that are currently great, right? We can't just say, well, things are currently great and that's it. We can't limit our perspective to just things that are currently great, because just because things are currently great doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Things aren't always going to be currently great or currently comfortable. Things will deteriorate, and we can see signs. We can see red flags. We can see signs that hatred towards Jews is becoming more and more common. It's becoming more and more trendy and popular. And there is a groundswell of hatred towards Jews. And you can see it on Twitter. You can see it all throughout the internet. Well, not all the internet, but throughout much of the internet, you can see it. You can see it in the YouTube comments section. And if you say things such as the things that I'm saying right now, you will be seen as just some kind of a cuck. They'll say, oh, you're a cuck, or you're a liar, or you're an exaggerator, or you're a drama king, or whatever. But you can see the signs. And when you see people saying things like, the Jews are behind the refugee crisis, the Jews foment hatred towards whites, this is reminiscent to the type of propaganda that existed before the Holocaust. The Jews are behind communism. The Jews want Germany to become communist. The Jews bring degeneracy to society. This is the type of propaganda that was widespread in Germany before the Holocaust. And we're seeing this sort of propaganda becoming more and more common, to the point where you have one of the wealthiest people on earth, one of the most influential people in the world, agreeing with this type of rhetoric. And I know that Elon Musk did say that he's against anti-Semitism, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is that he agreed with this statement on Twitter, that Jewish communities foment hatred, and that we shouldn't really have any sympathy towards them when they're scared of Muslim immigrants, because they are the people behind Islamic immigration. And the future is going to be a Holocaust. That's going to be the future. Not just of, and I think that the people who are filled with bloodlust, they will go after refugees, but they will also go after Jewish people. And I think that this is going to be the future. A great film that illustrates this is Children of Men. Look at the film Children of Men. You got a bunch of people in England living in a refugee camp, and the military decides to wipe them out. I think this is the future. I think that this is the future. And this video is not meant to be sensational or anything like that. This video is meant to be a warning. And I know that I have a very small voice, and I know that I don't really have a lot of followers. I have a very small audience. But for this small audience, consider this a warning. When we see this sort of thing growing to the point where you have people sympathizing with Hamas, to the point where you have people blaming the Jews for things like the refugee crisis, and they're not just saying things like, George Soros is behind this, right? They're not just saying things like, oh, this particular person who so happens to be Jewish is behind this. They're saying the Jews. They're saying Jewish communities. They're saying, the Jew. I mean, they're just making that general statement. And it's like when people say Arabs are fill in the blank. It's like when Ben Shapiro said something like Jews build things and Arabs destroy things. I mean, it's that kind of rhetoric. And it's not good. It's just not good. And these are red flags. And we are heading towards very gloomy, bleak, and moribund and dark times. And I hate to sound like some gloom and doom guy, but history repeats for those who do not want to learn from history. And one thing that history teaches us is that people don't learn from history. You had World War I, in which Germany rose up and tried to take over Europe. Germany lost, and people thought, well, that was the war to end all wars. They didn't want to look back into history, and Germany rose again. And you see Germany rising up again. and who is one of the leading Middle East analysts for the Germans in the sense of Middle East policy. It's I think her name is Muriel Asseberg, and she says what? That Israel does war crimes, and that Germany must be a force for international justice to the point where Germany should extend its police force, to extend its law enforcement into other countries. She doesn't say Israel, but she says other countries, but she definitely targets Israel in a lot of her writings. History is going to repeat. And this is a warning. And I know this sounds dramatic and it sounds crazy and adventuresome and far out, but if there's one thing that we know from history, it's that people throughout these centuries have hated Jews. And the Holocaust isn't the first time when humans decided to exterminate Jews. Now, the Holocaust is the event when you had the most horrendous massacre of Jews, and it was the biggest massacre of the Jews. But it wasn't the first time that people got up to kill the Jews. And the Holocaust is not going to be the last. The Holocaust will not be the last. It's going to happen again. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.